Hey everyone, it's me, John. Hello. I'm at the fire station here in Newton, and we're beginning the climb of the 4 hills of Newton in the Boston Marathon, which will culminate in climbing Heartbreak Hill. Now, I'm not a runner, I'm a walker, but just coming in here and driving it, there's quite an incline. And it's always been the make or break place for runners here in the marathon because their glycogen levels, their muscular glycogen levels are depleted at this point, and they have to find something extra and dig down. So I wanted to walk here and then show you a couple of statues that you've seen the images previously during the discussion of the Boston Marathon with myself, Kevin, and Dick. So in this walk on Heartbreak Hill, I wanted to tell you about the 4 hills of Newton and also salute some of the contemporary champions of the Boston Marathon, which has been dominated by runners from Ethiopia and Kenya. And they've won it multiple times, set course records. But I also want to talk about the women, the stars of today that are running the Boston Marathon. The first man to win the first wheelchair division race for the Boston Marathon was Robert Hall. He won it in 1975, and he would come back and win it again in 1977. Canadian Andre Vigé would win it 3 times. And then it was Jim Nobb's turn. He won it twice in the early 80s. 10 years later, in the early 90s, he would rattle off 3 in a row. Jim Nobb would win 5 Boston Marathon men's wheelchair divisions. Franz Nietlisbach from Switzerland would win 5 Boston Marathon men's wheelchair divisions, including 4 in a row. I'm now moving off the first hill of the 4 in Newton on my way to Heartbreak Hill. So then came Ernst van Dijk of South Africa. He would win 9 out of 10 Boston Marathon men's wheelchair divisions, including 6 in a row. And finally, as we get closer to this era, from 2015 through 2018, Marcel Hug from Switzerland won it 4 times in a row, including a course record of 1:13:05. Sharon Rahn of the United States won the inaugural women's wheelchair division race in 1977. Candace Cable Brooks of the United States won an unprecedented 6 times in the 1980s. Jean Driscoll of the United States won 7 consecutive women's division victories in the Boston Marathon from 1990 through 1996. And then she came back and won an incredible 8th time in the year 2000. Japan's Wakako Tushida won it 5 consecutive times from 2007 through 2011. American Tatiana McFadden won it 5 times between 2013 and 2018. The current course record is held by Swiss rider Manuela Schär from Switzerland, a time of 1 hour, 28 minutes, and 17 seconds. In 2017, the hand cycle division was introduced, and Tom Davis has won all 3 races from the United States. Also in 2017, Michelle Love from the United States was the only female participant in the hand cycle division for women. If you look at the cumulative victories across all divisions, the United States is in first, followed by Kenya second, Canada third, Japan, and Switzerland. As the 1980s rolled around, the Bill Rogers era was over. Toshihiko Seiko of Japan won it in 1981. He would also win it in 87. In 82, Alberto Salazar from the United States, and Greg Meyer from 1983. In 84 and 85, it was Jeff Smith from Great Britain. The first African to win the Boston Marathon was in 1988 from Kenya, Ibrahim Hussein. He would go on to win it 2 more times. In 1989, Abibi Mekinen was the first Ethiopian to win the Boston Marathon. From 1993 through 1995, Cosmas Ndeti of Kenya won 3 consecutive Boston Marathons, including a course record in 94. In the earlier part of this century, in 2003, 06, 07, and 08, Robert Kipchoge Cheruiyot won it 4 times, including a course record in 06. Lalisa Desisa, also from Kenya, won it twice in 2013 and 2015. But it was Jeffrey Mutai from Kenya who not only set the course record at 2 hours, 3 minutes, and 2 seconds, but it was also a world record for marathons, and he did that in 2011. For the women, of course, Bobby Gibb is credited with winning the first 3 unofficial Boston marathons, and then Sarah Mae Berman from the United States won 3 herself. Fatuma Roba from Ethiopia won 3 consecutive women's divisions from 1997 through 1999, including a course record. And then there was the immortal Catherine Ndariba from Kenya. She won it 4 times. In fact, she set a world record for women in marathons in Chicago when she ran an astounding 2 hours, 18 minutes, and 47 seconds. In 2014, Buzanesh Diba of Ethiopia set the Boston Marathon record for women with a time of 2 hours, 19 minutes, and 59 seconds. So Johnny Kelly actually ran 61 Boston Marathons and only finished 58 times. But he represented the United States in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin and also in 1948. In 1992, Johnny Kelly ran his final race at the age of 84. And in 1995, he was named the Grand Marshal. But perhaps the most famous Boston Marathon that Johnny Kelly is known for is a marathon that he didn't win. He almost did, though. What Johnny Kelly is most known for is the 1939 Boston Marathon. That's where he closed a half-mile deficit behind Ellison Tarzan Brown from Rhode Island, a Native American from the Narragansett tribe. He would be the second Native American to win the Boston Marathon after Tom Longboat did it in 1907. So as it says in the 4 Hills of Newton, this is where they test the runners. Johnny Kelly trailed Ellison Tarzan Brown. Now Brown had won the Boston Marathon before in 1936. In fact, he was a colorful character and people looked forward to seeing him run by. In 1935, with 5 miles to go, he took off his sneakers and threw them into the crowd. In 1937, on a hot day, realizing that he couldn't win the race, he decided to take a swim in Lake Cochituate. And finally, in 1939, he was out on a blistering pace. He would set a course record at 2 hours and 28 minutes. And a half mile behind him as they entered the Hills of Newton was Johnny Kelly, his rival. Kelly somehow closed the gap. And as he reached Ellison Tarzan Brown at the crest of the final hill here in Newton, he tapped him on the shoulder. That startled Brown, and he darted, as Dick said, like a rabbit, and would go on to win the Boston Marathon. Later, Jerry Nason, a Boston sports writer, would say that badly beaten Johnny Kelly, but his great heart is not broken. Nason would go on to name this final hill between miles 20 and 21 as Heartbreak Hill. And it would become iconic in the lexicon of Boston Marathon. To his dying day in 2004, Johnny Kelly was remorseful about tapping Tarzan Brown on the shoulder. Now, Tarzan Brown lived a really tragic life. He was killed when he was hit by a car crossing the street outside of a Westerly bar in Rhode Island. But he's known for this particular race because this is why we call these hills, the Hills of Newton, the final one that I'm about to ascend, Heartbreak Hill. And of course, the road across the street from the monument is called Ellison Road in honor of Ellison Tarzan Brown. So even though the term Heartbreak Hill is credited to writer Jerry Nason of the Boston Globe, there was an actual reference to these sets of hills in Newton in 1907 in the Boston Globe where they called them the Heartbreaking Hills of Newton. I'm at the corner of Grant and Commonwealth. This is where Mark Proctor and Charlotte McKee for years had this maple tree that was dying. So last year, 2020, they decided to make something good out of it. And they commissioned sculptor Ken Packey to carve a runner. And you can see the broken heart underneath his right leg. This marks the summit of the 4th and final hill in Newton known as Heartbreak Hill at 20.4 miles. So just walking up these 4 sloping hills of Newton, I can understand the grade and the incline of these hills and how it could devastate a runner as they have already run 17 miles in the Boston Marathon. It keeps going up, 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 then it gives you downhill, then up, up, up again. It isn't the greatest elevation or the greatest hill in any American marathon. That's probably Chicago. Heartbreak Hill is really only an elevation of anywhere between 88 or 91 feet, depending upon who you reference. So that does it for this segment on Heartbreak Hill and some of the marathon victors of the 21st century. For Kevin Flanagan and Dick Johnson, I'm John Horrigan for Then It Was a Game. Thanks so much for joining us.